Something serious has just unfolded in Burkina Faso. It didn't make the front pages. It didn't trend, but it could rewrite the country's future. The government gathered, decisions were made, and now the state is moving in ways few saw coming. What did they plan behind closed doors? Why are these decisions so important? And what does it mean for the country and the continent? Let's find out. Burkina Faso's government just made a series of bold, coordinated decisions that could redefine its future. In a single council meeting, the country addressed education, security, justice, and economic reform without foreign aid. What happened wasn't routine policy. It was the quiet launch of a national transformation with continental implications. The council didn't emerge with fanfare, but what it left behind was a series of decisions that read less like routine governance and more like a strategic reset. Not reactionary, not symbolic. These were operational shifts, the kind that tell you a country is not only paying attention to its problems, but is finally choosing to solve them. Each file approved that day carries the weight of a government trying to re-establish its physical and psychological footprint, not by force, but by building. And where better to start than in the very places that feel most forgotten? It begins with the land. In the northern zone of Burkina Faso, particularly in the Sahel region, there are patches of land that haven't seen development in decades, not because they're unfit, but because they've been wrapped in bureaucratic confusion, tangled property disputes, and, above all, the chilling reach of armed groups. This time, the state didn't negotiate with hesitation. It issued a decree classifying a 100-hectare zone in Dori as an area of urgent public utility. That single phrase flipped the equation. It unlocked the legal framework to move forward with something that had been delayed for years: the construction of a training and research unit in science and technology and an accompanying university residence. This wasn't about building walls and classrooms. This was about planting permanence in a region where presence often disappears. A place once described by silence is about to echo with the sounds of lectures, lab equipment, and students finding their future. And once you've established the presence of minds, what naturally follows is the presence of law. When conflict intensifies, courts tend to be the first to close. Judges withdraw. Cases freeze. The very idea of legal protection collapses. That's what happened across parts of Burkina Faso. But now, a decision has been made to reverse that spiral. The government has approved not just the return of judicial personnel, but a material reinforcement of the justice system itself. That means restoring the High Court, rehabilitating the Nuna prison, planning and studying the feasibility of new courts in Bogandé and Tougan. In these regions, courtrooms are more than legal infrastructure. They're an antidote to fear. People don't just want safety. They want a system they can rely on when things go wrong. They want rules they believe in, not just rifles they duck from. It's one thing to have a police force. It's another thing entirely to have a working justice system that holds power accountable and gives citizens a path back to dignity. But speaking of the police, they weren't left out either. Burkina Faso's internal security challenges aren't abstract. They're daily, real, and at times overwhelming. But instead of announcing flashy troop surges or temporary deployments, the government took a more deliberate approach by rethinking who gets to protect the country. A fresh wave of police recruitment was authorized. But this isn't your standard expansion. This time, the recruitment categories were tailored, targeted, and symbolic. They include commissioned officers, technicians, specialized skill holders, women, individuals connected to past national sacrifice, like families of fallen fighters and former volunteer defenders. The message here is subtle but firm. Security isn't just a job for the traditional few. It's a shared responsibility, one that needs diverse hands, real representation, and repaired trust between the state and the people. You don't rebuild public confidence with uniforms alone. You rebuild it by who wears them. Not all progress is visible from the outside. Some of it takes place in paperwork, in decrees that never make headlines. One such move involved lifting a quiet, powerful monopoly that had gone unchallenged for too long: the exclusive control over infrastructure quality testing. For years, one state lab held the final word on public construction standards. But now, the council has opened that space. No more sole authority, no more unchecked influence. The field is being widened to welcome competition, efficiency, and better outcomes. It may seem like a technical shift, but in reality it's a deep political statement. The state is ready to disperse control and demand results, not rituals. And then came a decision that connects economy to identity. The formal recognition and empowerment of the Faso Abattoir Agency as a public economic establishment. Livestock has always been a backbone of Burkina Faso's rural life. But for too long, the processing and profits were handled far from the hands that raised the animals. This decree changes that. It gives the agency legal authority to act independently, tools to scale meat production and export, and the platform to support domestic food sovereignty. It's no longer just about feeding the nation. It's about ensuring the nation controls its food supply chain, from herders to markets. Each of these decisions isn't just a policy update. They're chess moves on a complex board, pieces repositioned not for immediate praise, but for long-term control of the narrative, of the economy, and of the people's faith in their state. But if this is what was done, the question becomes, why now? Why this timing, this urgency, this fire? That's what we'll uncover next. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. You don't rewire a country on a whim. Not when the stakes are this high. Not when every district carries the memory of instability, and every institution carries the burden of being late. The decisions taken by Burkina Faso's government didn't come out of comfort. They came out of necessity, but not just the survivalist kind. This wasn't about patching holes in a sinking ship. This was about steering it somewhere it's never dared to go before. To understand why these specific changes were made now, you have to look at three pressure points converging all at once: territorial fragility, ideological urgency, and a rising demand for national authorship. Burkina Faso remains in a state of siege in several northern and eastern regions. Towns aren't just threatened, they're contested, depopulated, or fully overtaken. Whole communities have been displaced. Institutions have vanished from the map. In some places, the state is an echo, a rumor people hope is still true. But the Traoré government understands something critical. You can't reclaim a country with silence. That's why every recent decision targets visibility and presence. Not just military presence, state presence. A courtroom is not just a legal space. It's proof that the state still exists in that region. A school doesn't just educate, it anchors families. A meat processing facility doesn't just serve the economy, it pulls people back into legitimate state-backed networks. The urgency behind these reforms lies in the geography of conflict. When insurgents destroy police stations, the state doesn't just respond with arms, it responds by putting something else in their place. Something heavier than bullets, a future. There's another layer behind the timing: political consolidation. Ibrahim Traoré didn't come to power through a quiet election. His rise was forged in upheaval, riding on a wave of frustration with indecision, delay, and dependency. With that rise came expectation, the kind that doesn't wait years for slow reforms. The pressure to deliver something real, fast, and irreversible is immense. You see it in the way the government bypasses old bottlenecks. Declaring land of urgent public utility? That's not just about land, it's about cutting through red tape. Lifting state monopolies in public works? That's a move to shake loose a bureaucracy that chokes progress. In every move, you can see the government making this calculation. Either we act boldly now, or our credibility dies quietly later. There's no middle ground, and they know it. Burkina Faso has always had brilliant people. But for decades, the country has been forced to borrow direction from donors, foreign advisors, structural adjustment programs, and peacekeeping missions that often kept the peace for everyone except actual Burkinabe. What's different now is that the state is writing its storyline. When the government chooses to fund judicial renovations without asking for foreign aid, it's not just a budgeting choice, it's a symbolic declaration of authorship. When it integrates former volunteers and the families of the fallen into national police recruitment, it isn't just about filling quotas, it's an act of moral restitution to those who stepped in when the state was absent. Even the decision to strengthen domestic meat processing reflects a desire to reclaim local value, to stop exporting raw products and importing foreign solutions, to keep what belongs to Burkina Faso inside Burkina Faso. These choices are fueled by a broader vision, a post-colonial state that no longer leans, it stands. There's also the matter of continental perception. Across Africa, people are watching Burkina Faso more closely than ever, not just because of the political transitions, but because of how confidently the leadership is rejecting old systems. Whether it's distancing from Western funding mechanisms, withdrawing from ECOWAS alongside Mali and Niger, or openly challenging the utility of international organizations, Burkina Faso is projecting a very clear posture. We decide for ourselves now. But gestures are empty without substance. That's why this April reform package matters. It puts real infrastructure, policy, and legal muscle behind the country's ideological position. It says, we don't just criticize global power structures, we're building alternatives to them. There's also a quieter truth that can't be ignored. Burkina Faso doesn't have the luxury of time. Every delay is a win for insurgents. Every bureaucratic jam is a propaganda victory for those who argue the state can't deliver. That's why the government isn't waiting for perfection. It's launching what it has, refining as it goes, and choosing presence over paralysis. No policy can be judged solely by its paperwork. But one thing is clear. These decisions weren't made casually. They were born of pressure, of urgency, of a leadership that knows it's being watched by its citizens, its critics, and a continent craving boldness. These reforms are a bet that swift state building can outpace state collapse. That visibility can outrun violence. That control can return, not through occupation, but through service. And now that these choices are in motion, the next question becomes, what will they change? Because decisions are one thing, impact is another. Decisions are the beginning, but real power lies in the aftermath, in the visible and invisible ways those decisions ripple through a country's daily life. For Burkina Faso, the reforms passed on April 16th are not just instructions from the top. They are a blueprint that will quietly reconstruct the relationship between the state and its citizens, one region, one sector, one institution at a time. Because after years of trauma, skepticism, and betrayal, what people are really waiting for isn't announcements, it's evidence, and the evidence this time may finally be coming. Let's begin where the state's collapse was most visible, the peripheral zones, especially in the north and east. For years, these regions have been gripped by fear and left out of development plans. Residents have lived with the belief that they've been forgotten, sacrificed to geography and geopolitics. But the reforms passed are visibly and physically returning the state to these front lines. The construction of academic institutions in regions like Dori isn't just about science degrees. It's about the psychology of presence. Concrete buildings say something that no press conference ever can. We're here again. We're not leaving. And that sense of renewed presence changes everything. People who had begun to think only of fleeing, to Ouaga, to Ghana, to anywhere safer, may begin to think about staying. About planting crops, sending their children to school, opening a small shop, and returning home. When the state shows up, people start to believe that life can resume. Conflict doesn't just destroy buildings, it destroys possibilities. It erases futures. And for many young Burkinabe, especially in rural and war-affected areas, the only visible futures were exile, armed groups, or economic hopelessness. That changes when young people see new routes to dignity. A young mechanic in Kaya, who thought the only path forward was migration, might now hear of a police recruitment drive specifically seeking technical roles. A widow in Fata Ngorma, who lost her husband to conflict, might now know there's a quota for families of the fallen, and a real reason to walk back into state service. These aren't symbolic gestures, they're functional bridges, taking people out of limbo and bringing them back into national purpose. Where there was isolation, there is now inclusion. And where there was grief, there may now be recognition. After years of institutional failure, trust doesn't return overnight. But it does start to rebuild when people interact with things that work. If a court opens in a place that hasn't seen a judge in 4 years, people don't need a campaign to tell them the system is back. They see a case filed, a land dispute settled, a conflict avoided. And it sticks. If a university campus in the Sahel region opens on time, with actual teachers and functioning facilities, parents don't need a state lecture about reform. They just watch their children walk into classrooms instead of into exile. That's the real currency of change in Burkina Faso right now. visible, provable service delivery. Every functioning courtroom, each new campus wall, every fair recruitment notice, they all say one thing louder than any speech. The state is real again. One of the most understated impacts of these decisions lies in how they chip away at institutional monopolies that have held the country hostage. When the construction regulation sector was controlled by a single public lab, that exclusivity bred not just inefficiency, but quiet gatekeeping, the kind that inflated costs, slowed progress, and stifled innovation. Lifting that control opens the door for faster projects, cleaner audits, and private-public partnerships that don't have to navigate bureaucratic black holes. That reform alone could change the entire tempo of national development. Roads get built faster. Bridges get inspected by multiple eyes. Corruption has fewer corners to hide in. And over time, people begin to notice. When roads last longer, when buildings stop collapsing, when contracts become competitive, faith in systems returns. Burkina Faso has long held a paradox. Rich in resources, poor in control. Especially in agriculture and livestock, production has often been disconnected from profit. Farmers and herders produced value, but rarely captured it. By restructuring the Faso Abattoirs Agency, the government is signaling something deeper than just an upgrade in meat processing. It's declaring that value chains must serve the country before they serve exports. That is what Burkinabe hands raise and slaughter. Burkinabe institutions must own and distribute. This isn't just economic logic, it's emotional. It tells rural communities, especially those dependent on cattle rearing, that they're no longer just a raw material source for others. They're part of a national economic loop that finally includes them. And when you give people a stake in the system, you give them a reason to defend it. The changes triggered by these reforms will not be immediate, but their signals are already loud. They whisper something powerful in markets, in mosques, in bus stations, in villages. The state is trying again, not performing, not preaching, trying. And that subtle shift in public perception, from total cynicism to cautious hope, is one of the most dangerous things for any insurgency, and the most valuable for any government. Because once people believe the state is worth relying on, it eventually becomes something else entirely, a state worth fighting for. And that's where Burkina Faso now stands, not just on the edge of reform, but on the cusp of something far more profound: redefinition. Do you think anything can stop Burkina Faso from changing? Is the change real this time? Let us know in the comment section. Are you ready for a new Burkina Faso? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.